Layla thought her wedding to Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil was the start of a new life, a dazzling escape into a world of unimaginable wealth and privilege. But just hours later, in the chilling silence of their penthouse suite floating above the Dubai skyline, she discovered this new life came with a bill of sale. The price was 3 million dirhams, and she was the asset that had just been acquired. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single second of this story. But let's go back to where it all began. The ceremony was less a wedding and more a coronation. Hundreds of guests, a collection of the Gulf's most powerful figures, moved through the grand ballroom of the Burj Al Arab like sharks in a gilded aquarium. The air was thick with the scent of expensive oud and acres of white orchids, so heavy it was almost hard to breathe. Layla felt the weight of it all, not just the diamond-encrusted tiara on her head or the intricate gold embroidery on her gown, but the crushing weight of expectation. Beside her, Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil, a man 20 years her senior with eyes as hard and cold as the diamonds on his wrist, guided her through the crowd. His hand on the small of her back was not a gesture of affection. It was a statement of ownership. He presented her to his associates with a thin, proprietary smile, his gaze sweeping over her as if she were a prize racehorse he had just acquired. She smiled until her cheeks ached, murmured the correct pleasantries, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling growing in her stomach. This wasn't a union. It was a transaction, and she was the centerpiece of the deal. Later, the silence of the penthouse suite was a stark contrast to the noise of the reception. It was a vast, cold space of marble, glass, and chrome, with a panoramic view of a city that glittered like a carpet of scattered jewels. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cage. Khalid had been dismissive since they arrived, taking a series of clipped, important-sounding phone calls in Arabic, pacing the length of the enormous living area. Layla stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the endless stream of headlights on Sheikh Zed Road below, feeling smaller and more isolated than ever before. He finished a call and turned to her, his expression unreadable. "My father will be pleased," he said, his voice flat. "The partnership is solidified." He spoke of her family as if they were a rival corporation, not the people who had raised her. He then moved to the expansive balcony to take another call, leaving the glass door slightly ajar. Perhaps he thought she couldn't understand his dialect, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Layla stayed frozen in place, her reflection a ghostly figure against the city lights. But she heard the words clearly. It was a conversation with her own father. There was no warmth, no talk of her happiness. It was all business. Khalid's tone was sharp, final. "The final transfer was made this afternoon. The 3 million is confirmed. The agreement is complete." There was a pause. "She is everything you promised. An acceptable asset. Asset. Agreement. 3 million. The words echoed in the silent room, stripping away the last illusion of her fairy tale wedding. She wasn't a bride. She was collateral, a debt settled, a product sold by her own father to this cold, powerful man. A wave of nausea and ice-cold fury washed over her. Every smile she had forced, every polite nod, every moment of the day had been part of a lie she hadn't even known she was telling. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, unbreathable. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Khalid ended the call and stepped back into the room, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He walked toward the bar to pour himself a drink, his back to her. "Now," he said, his voice laced with an authority that made her skin crawl, "where were we?" In that moment, Layla saw not a husband, but her jailer. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on a heavy, crystal award sitting on a marble console table, a tribute to one of Khalid's many business triumphs. Her mind went eerily blank, all thought replaced by a single, roaring impulse. Her movements were fluid, silent. She picked up the solid crystal obelisk, its weight a surprising comfort in her trembling hands. He was still facing the bar, oblivious. The entire world narrowed to the space between them, to the cold weight in her hands, and the final, irrevocable step she was about to take. The crystal was heavy in her hands, a solid block of ice and fury. She moved without a sound, the thick carpet swallowing her footsteps. Khalid was still turned away, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, the picture of a man in absolute control of his world. He never heard her coming. The first blow connected with the back of his skull with a sickening, wet crack. It was a sound that didn't belong in this pristine, silent room. His body went rigid for a split second, a silent, electric shock. The crystal glass he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the noise deafening in the sudden stillness. He made a guttural sound, a noise of pure animal surprise, and stumbled forward, his arms flailing. Rage, cold and pure, had taken over. She didn't think. She just acted, bringing the award down again, and then a third time, her movements clumsy but driven by a force she didn't recognize. He collapsed onto the floor in a heap, landing among the shards of broken glass and the spreading pool of his expensive drink, which was now beginning to mix with the dark, rapidly expanding stain of his blood. Silence crashed down. The only sounds were her own ragged, gasping breaths and a high-pitched ringing in her ears. She stood over him, the bloody crystal obelisk still clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. It felt like an extension of her own arm. She stared at the scene, at the man who was no longer a man, but a problem on the floor, and her mind felt utterly blank, a slate wiped clean by the violence of the last 30 seconds. She was looking at it, but she wasn't processing it. Her reflection stared back at her from a mirrored wall panel. A woman in a magnificent, diamond-white wedding gown, her hair perfectly styled, her face a mask of shock, a dark crimson stain blooming across the pristine silk of her bodice. She looked like a character from a nightmare. Then, the blankness shattered, and a tidal wave of pure, undiluted panic slammed into her. What had she done? Her heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. She dropped the crystal award. It landed with a heavy, final thud on the plush carpet. Her eyes darted to the door. Locked. To the windows. Sealed. This suite, a symbol of ultimate luxury moments ago, was now a high-tech prison cell, hundreds of feet in the air. She was the wife of Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil. His security detail, a team of ex-special forces soldiers, would be just outside on this floor. They would have access codes. They would be monitoring everything. Her passport, her phone, her entire identity was likely in a safe controlled by his staff. She had nowhere to run. She was trapped in a gilded cage with a dead man. A dead man whose family was one of the most powerful and ruthless in the entire Middle East. Her mind raced, trying to find a plan, a way out, but there was nothing. It was like running into a solid wall of steel. Call her father, the man who sold her. He would be the first one to hand her over to save his own skin. She stumbled backward, away from the body, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. She had to do something. Clean it up? The thought was insane. Blood was already soaking into the seams of the white marble, pooling in the grout lines. It was on her dress, on her hands, under her fingernails. She frantically looked around the room, her gaze landing on the white linen napkins on the bar. A pathetic, desperate idea. She grabbed one and began to uselessly dab at the blood on her dress, smearing it, making it worse. The motion was frantic, meaningless, the action of a mind completely overwhelmed. Just as she was about to completely break down, a new sound cut through the silence. A sharp, electronic chime. It was his phone, lying on the marble bar where he'd left it. The screen lit up, illuminating a name that made her blood run cold. His Highness, his father. It rang once, twice, and then, as if summoned by the call itself, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the suite's main door. Mr. Al-Jamil. A man's voice called out, calm and professional. Security, sir. Is everything all right? The knock came again, harder this time, a sharp, authoritative sound that vibrated through the floor. Mr. Al-Jamil. The voice was firm, laced with professional concern. We have a call from His Highness. We need to confirm that everything is in order. The phone on the bar continued its relentless, shrill summons. The two sounds converged, creating a symphony of impending doom. Layla's mind screamed. She was paralyzed, a statue in a blood-stained dress, feet away from a dead man and the most powerful family in the Emirates demanding an answer. Any second now, they would use a master key. They would burst in. It was over. But then, a flicker, a tiny, cold spark of self-preservation ignited in the absolute zero of her panic. She had one card to play. One desperate, humiliating, and possibly life-saving card. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass, she crept towards the door, staying out of sight of the peephole. She pressed her cheek against the cold, polished wood. She had to control her voice, pitch it just right. She thought of actresses in old movies, feigning a particular kind of breathless intimacy. "One moment," she called out, trying to inject a note of flustered annoyance into her tone. She let a few seconds of silence hang in the air, a silence she hoped they would fill with their own assumptions. "My husband, we request not to be disturbed for the rest of the night." She forced a slight tremble into her voice, a suggestion of a bride on her wedding night, interrupted at a delicate moment. It felt vile, speaking of intimacy while Khalid's body grew cold on the floor behind her, but it was all she had. There was a pause from the other side of the door. She could practically hear the two security men exchanging awkward glances. "Our apologies, Mrs. Al-Jamil," the voice replied, instantly deferential. "We will inform His Highness that his son is occupied. We will not disturb you again." She heard their footsteps retreat down the hallway. She stayed frozen, pressed against the door, until the sound had completely faded. She was alone again. The reprieve was a shock to her system, a jolt of electricity that cleared the fog from her mind. The panic was still there, a roaring ocean in the background, but now there was a single, clear thought on the shore: survive. The first step was to get out of the dress. It was a macabre costume, a flashing beacon of her guilt. She moved to the enormous walk-in closet, a room larger than her old bedroom. Her hands fumbled with the hundreds of tiny pearl buttons on the back of the gown. They were slick with sweat and something else she refused to name. Finally, with a desperate rip, she tore the fabric and wriggled out of it, letting it fall into a silken, blood-stained heap on the floor. Standing there in her undergarments, she felt the chill of the air conditioning on her skin and the even deeper chill of her new reality. She was no longer Layla the bride. She was a killer, a fugitive. She needed to look the part. Her own suitcases were untouched, filled with the designer clothes her father had bought for her new life. Useless. Her eyes fell on Khalid's luggage, a set of sleek, black leather cases. She opened one. Inside were rows of perfectly folded linen shirts and tailor trousers. At the bottom was a simple black t-shirt and a pair of dark, comfortable-looking cargo pants meant for travel. She pulled them on. They were ridiculously large, but they were anonymous. They were armor. Next, his wallet and passport on the nightstand. She took all the cash, a thick wedge of American dollars and Emirati dirhams, and stuffed it into her pockets. She took one of his credit cards, knowing it would be useless soon, but feeling a small, bitter satisfaction in the act. His phone had finally stopped ringing. She picked it up, her finger hovering over the power button. She hesitated, then swiped it open. His thumbprint was no longer an option. She tried a simple passcode. 1-2-3-4. Nothing. His birth year. Nothing. Then she remembered the numbers from the phone call. 3 million. She typed in 30000. The phone unlocked. A cold smile touched her lips. Of course. She immediately put it on airplane mode, severing its connection to the outside world. She needed to wipe it, but there was no time. In the entrance hall, she found a service panel near the floor, discreetly hidden. She opened it. Inside were the controls for the suite's electronics. On a hunch, she found the circuit breaker labeled Security Cam, INT, and flipped it. A tiny red light went dark. It was a long shot, but maybe she just bought herself a few more minutes of invisibility. Now, how to get out? The main door was impossible. The elevators would be watched. But a suite this size, in a hotel like this, had to have a service entrance, a way for staff to come and go unseen. She found it behind a paneled wall in the kitchenette area, a plain, unadorned metal door. It was the ugliest thing in the entire penthouse, and to her, it was the most beautiful. This was her only way out. She took one last look at the pristine, silent living room, at the dark shape on the floor that had once been her husband. She felt nothing. No remorse, no fear, just the cold, hard certainty of a survivor. She put her hand on the cold metal handle of the service door, took a deep breath, and prepared to step into the unseen corridors of the hotel, a ghost in a dead man's clothes. The heavy steel door opened not into another hallway, but into a different world. The opulent silence of the penthouse was replaced by the low, steady hum of the building's hidden machinery. The air here was different, cooler, smelling faintly of disinfectant and ozone. This was the hotel's nervous system, a stark, utilitarian network of concrete floors and bare, white walls, crisscrossed by thick bundles of cables and pipes running along the ceiling. The only light came from cold, fluorescent tubes that cast long, distorted shadows. There were no cameras here. This was a blind spot, a forgotten artery. Layla closed the service door behind her, the latch clicking shut with a sound that felt like a point of no return. For the first time since she'd picked up the Crystal Award, she was out of the cage. But she was now lost in the walls. She chose a direction at random and started walking, her oversized clothes rustling with every step. Her bare feet were silent on the smooth, cold concrete. Every sound was magnified in the quiet hum. The distant clatter of what might be a kitchen, the low groan of an elevator shaft, the frantic beating of her own heart. She moved with a desperate purpose, hugging the walls, peering around each corner before she took it. Her eyes scanned constantly for the telltale black domes of security cameras. She saw one at the end of a long corridor and immediately ducked into a small alcove, her back pressed against the cold wall, holding her breath until her lungs burned. This was a maze, and she had no map. She was a ghost, and her only goal was to drift downwards. After what felt like an eternity of walking through identical-looking corridors, she found what she was looking for, a sign with a simple, universal symbol for stairs. The stairwell was even starker, a vertical tube of raw concrete and steel railings, lit by caged, yellow bulbs at each landing. The air was still and stale. She started her descent, taking the steps two at a time. Floor after floor, the numbers on the wall counted down her escape. 60, 59, 58. Her legs began to burn, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the soft slap of her bare feet on the steps. It was a hypnotic, grueling rhythm. At around the 20th floor, she heard it, a noise from below, the heavy clang of a fire door opening, followed by the sound of men's voices and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on the concrete. They were coming up. Security. A routine patrol. Her blood ran cold. There was nowhere to hide. She scrambled back up a flight of stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs, and pressed herself into the darkest corner of the landing, trying to make herself small, trying to stop breathing. The footsteps grew louder, echoing up the concrete shaft. Two men, their voices casual, complaining about their shift. They passed her landing without a glance, their flashlights cutting beams through the dusty air below her. She waited, every muscle in her body screaming, until their footsteps faded into the floors above. The close call left her trembling, but her resolve hardened. Down. She had to get to the bottom. She continued her descent, more cautiously now, until she reached the landing marked LG. Lower ground. The door opened into a much louder, more chaotic world. The air was now thick with the smells of cooking oil, bleach, and refuse. This was the hotel's engine room. Staff in uniforms hurried past, pushing large, rattling laundry carts or carrying trays. No one paid her any attention. In her baggy, nondescript clothes, she was just another part of the background noise. She saw a set of double doors at the end of the corridor, propped open with a rubber wedge. Through them, she could see the dark expanse of a loading bay and the humid glow of the Dubai night. This was it, her exit. She pulled the hood of the sweatshirt she'd found in Khalid's bag over her head, kept her face down, and walked towards the light. She moved with the harried pace of the other workers, trying to project an aura of someone who was late for a break, someone who belonged. A single security guard stood near the exit, but he was engrossed in his phone, bathed in its blue light. She didn't look at him. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight past him and out into the open air. The sudden wave of thick, humid heat was a physical blow. The night was alive with the sound of distant traffic. She was out. She didn't run. She walked, forcing herself into a steady rhythm, away from the colossal, sail-shaped monument to wealth and power that loomed behind her. She walked until she could no longer see it. Then she found a dark side street and leaned against a wall, finally letting herself breathe. She had escaped the penthouse. She had escaped the hotel. But as she looked at the glittering, hypermodern city around her, a sprawling web of cameras, facial recognition, and technology, she knew with chilling certainty that her escape had only just begun. The freedom was a lie. Out on the streets of Dara, under the buzzing neon signs of budget hotels and 24-hour cafeterias, Layla was more exposed than she had been in the penthouse. Every passing police car sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The city, which had once seemed a playground of lights and ambition, now felt like a high-tech prison yard. 1,000 eyes, CCTV cameras on every lamppost, facial recognition software scanning every crowd, were hunting for her. She knew it was only a matter of time. The body would be found. Not if, but when. And when it was, the city would be locked down. Her face, the face of the blushing bride, would be on every screen. She found a dingy, back-alley internet cafe, the air thick with the smell of stale smoke and cheap cardamom tea. She paid a man with tired eyes for 30 minutes on a slow, outdated computer. Keeping the hood pulled low, she typed Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil into the search bar. The results were all from the last 24 hours, fawning articles about the wedding of the year, photos of her and Khalid, her smiling a hollow, practiced smile. There was nothing yet. No breaking news. No mention of a tragedy at the Burj Al Arab. They were controlling the narrative, keeping it quiet while the hunt began. They wouldn't want a scandal. They would want silent, brutal justice. This was her only advantage. The few hours of silence bought by a powerful family's obsession with its own image. She couldn't use the airports, the bus stations, or any official border crossing. They would be the first places they'd look. Her passport, her identity, was a trap. She had to become no one. Her mind raced back to conversations she had overheard, fragments of talk from the maids and drivers who had worked for her family, stories of another Dubai, the one that existed in the shadows. The illegal taxis that ferried workers from labor camps, the dhows that slipped out of the creek at night, their destinations unlisted, their cargo undeclared. It was a desperate, insane idea, but it was the only one she had. Using the last of her cash, she found a man who looked like he operated on the edges of the law, leaning against a beat-up sedan in a dimly lit parking lot. She didn't ask for the airport. She asked for the industrial port at Jebel Ali. She didn't haggle. She showed him a fistful of American dollars, and he nodded, his eyes scanning her baggy clothes and her desperate face without a flicker of curiosity. The drive was a silent, tense journey through the city's gleaming arteries and into its gritty veins. The skyscrapers gave way to endless stretches of warehouses, shipping containers stacked like colossal Lego bricks, and sprawling labor compounds fenced with barbed wire. This was the engine of the city, a place of sweat and steel, a world away from the marble towers. The driver dropped her a kilometer away from the main port entrance, as requested. The rest was on her. For hours, she watched from the shadows, observing the rhythm of the place. Trucks rumbled in and out, their drivers showing papers to board security guards. She saw her chance when a large refrigerated truck, its engine humming loudly, pulled over to the side of the road just before the main checkpoint. The driver got out, leaving the engine running, and went to a small kiosk to argue with a clerk over paperwork. It was now or never. She moved quickly, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The back of the truck was secured with a simple latch, not a padlock. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the cold metal. It gave way with a heavy click. She pulled the door open just enough to squeeze through and slipped inside, pulling it shut behind her. The darkness was absolute, and the cold hit her instantly, a biting, chemical chill that smelled of something vaguely like fruit. She huddled in a corner, shivering, as the truck's engine roared back to life. She felt the heavy lurch as it began to move, passing through the security gate and into the sprawling, chaotic world of the port. She had no idea where the truck was going. It could be heading to another emirate, or its contents could be destined for a cargo ship sailing to Somalia, India, Pakistan, anywhere. It didn't matter. Every kilometer the truck traveled was a kilometer away from the man on the penthouse floor. Hours passed in the freezing darkness. The truck stopped and started. She heard the distant sounds of cranes and ships' horns. Finally, it came to a long, shuddering halt, and the engine was cut. Silence. She waited, her body numb with cold, for what felt like a lifetime. Then, she heard the latch. The doors were thrown open, and blinding daylight flooded the container. A man's silhouette stood there, his face unreadable against the bright sun. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply looked at him, her face a blank mask. She had survived the night. She was no longer Layla, the bride sold for 3 million dirhams. She was just a ghost, a survivor, stepping out of the cold and into an unknown, unforgiving world, forever a prisoner of her own escape.